The most unbelievable ordeal of hundreds of passengers on a broken-down GNER intercity.
On one of the hottest days of the year, they were cooped up inside the carriages. Some collapsed. Staff refused to open the doors for air and refused to let them out until the passengers had enough and smashed their way out.
An inquiry is underway and GNER says lessons will be learnt. But the real story is from the passengers themselves, left stifled, angry and amazed that a mere train breakdown should descend into dangerous chaos.
Our reporter Mike Cartwright was at the scene last night and has followed the story through the day. He joins us now from Peterborough. Mike.
Well, take a look. Customer services, that's a department that's been under siege. Now, services have got back to normal today. Trains have been coming and going, but for hundreds of passengers, this is not over. I've been speaking to some today and last night by the trackside, and they say they want answers. They want to know why they had to endure a journey from hell. Take a look at this. Hundreds of passengers stranded by the trackside in boiling temperatures. The 1455 from Newcastle to King's Cross lost power just north of Huntingdon at around 5:30. On a sweltering hot afternoon, windows and doors were kept closed. Passengers were told they had to stay on board for health and safety reasons, but some smashed their way out, desperate for air.
People were dropping like flies in there and they wouldn't let people off the train. They said it was for health and safety reasons, but we think people would have actually died on that train if they hadn't come off.
People were fainting, sweat was pouring off, they couldn't breathe, and the people refused to open the doors, open windows.
One passenger on board was Labour MP Austin Mitchell.
But it was very hot there. I mean, I think the GNER staff have done the best, coped very well. So I've no complaint about that. It's just that I was going to speak at a dinner in London, coming down especially for it, and then going back home after it. Now everything's messed up.
The police helicopter arrived and paramedics treated passengers at the trackside. A few had to be taken to hospital.
We had a number of people, some who were suffering allergic reaction to insect bites, a little bit of reaction to heat. It's a lovely hot day, but not a good day to be by a track.
Now all passengers could do was wait and queue to get on to the next train to take them to Peterborough station. But on arrival, the sheer numbers of people meant there were not enough taxis and coaches to cope. Some had to spend the night in Peterborough.
We've been handing out bottles of water. We've taken as much accommodation as we possibly can. We've referred people to other hotels, just trying to make people as comfortable as possible.
Elsewhere, this was the scene at King's Cross station in London, the final stop for the train. At 2:30 in the morning, hundreds were still waiting to get to their next destination, and many were feeling the strain.
Exhausted, obviously, and really starving hungry. We've been on the train since 5:30 when we stopped.
The only thing we've been offered is a free tea and a free coffee, which I think is poor compensation for the strain that everybody's been put through. It's like going through what happened after the Blitz. It's insane.
I won't travel GNER again, I'll fly.
Rail pressure groups say that passengers will be entitled to compensation.
I think anybody caught up in last night's problems should exercise their rights under the Passengers Charter. If they were stranded for more than 50 minutes on a GNER service or more than 60 minutes on a wagon service, they are entitled to compensation. They should claim that compensation.
Jonathan Metcalf from GNER has promised a full inquiry and says lessons will be learnt.
I think the circumstances were probably as bad as you can imagine. The busiest time of day, one of the busiest parts of the East Coast Main Line, so a lot of trains affected, and one of the hottest days of the year. Fortunately, these sort of situations are very, very, very rare indeed. It's the worst one I have known of, but obviously I totally understand their frustration.
The train service was getting back to normal today, but for hundreds of passengers left stranded in soaring heat, it's been a disastrous ordeal.
We'll be joining Mike again in a few minutes, but first, throughout the day we've been asking people involved to phone in and share their experiences with us all.
Here are just some of the voices we've heard today recalling that nightmare journey.
People were looking really drained, very, very sweaty. Everybody looked as though they jumped into a swimming pool with all their clothes on. That is literally, and that is absolutely no exaggeration. People who were holding their mobile phones up to their ear, the sweat was dripping off of their elbows. Their clothes were wringing wet. It was just quite a situation I've never ever experienced before, but people looked very uncomfortable.
How angry are you today, looking back, and how angry were the other passengers?
I do think this morning that maybe more could have been done. Surely, in a situation like that, I think that the authorisation should have been overridden. They should have been able to open those doors. It's the same as leaving a dog in a car in a stifling heat with no window open. Eventually the dog will die.
And it wasn't only those on that train with problems. Louise Baverstock from Peterborough was on a wagon service stuck outside St Neots because of the problems up ahead. Eventually they had to walk up the track to the station.
That was pretty uncomfortable. I mean, I've been in a meeting in London, so I was dressed in a suit and high-heel shoes, and trying to balance on the sleepers going up the track was uncomfortable. Of more cause for concern, really, was there were quite a lot of people with luggage. There was a couple with a little girl, and they had a buggy and a travel cot, but also there was a blind lady on board, and she had a guide dog, so it must have been extremely difficult for her and her dog.
Well, thank you to everyone who got in touch with us today. Now we can rejoin Mike, as you can see. Mike, the question of compensation arises, surely?
Well, that's right. If you want compensation, what you need is a form like this. What you need to do is you need to go into your local station, your local GNER station, and pick one up. You fill in your name and address, and down the bottom here is what you put, where you put what you're annoyed about. And this could be a huge headache for the company, and potentially it could cost them tens of thousands of pounds. For example, the cost of a standard open return between Newcastle and London is £190. Now, GNER say they will fund the full cost to all passengers, and they also say they'll throw in a complimentary return journey. Plus, they say they'll pay for any taxis or hotel bills. Now, will this do any good? We don't know, but what we do know is that passengers on the trains had to endure temperatures of up to 115 degrees in their carriages. Now, what's it like to endure heat like that? Well, we asked our reporter, Carl Heidel, to step into a sauna to find out. Take a look at this.
Whoa. Gee, that is hot. And I know they would have probably got... The carriages would have gradually got hot, but this is almost unbearable. I've bought, as I say, some chocolates as a way to show if they start to melt. So I've opened those, and they're already starting to get a little bit tacky. I am sweating profusely. It's rolling down my back. It is really quite disgusting. In fact, it's... I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to stay in here. This doesn't do any good anymore.
After a while, I even started to get a headache, and the sweat rolling down my legs was particularly horrible.
I've been in here close on 25 minutes now, and it's time I've had enough, actually. I'm starting to feel a bit faint. If you just check out the chocolates here. Dean, if you could just look in here. They are that soggy.
And then suddenly, the temperature on the thermometer got to me.
And this actually is too hot to touch. It's an absolute nightmare. I've had enough. Now that, as you'd imagine, wasn't fun at all. I became really quite lightheaded, and I didn't even do a fraction of the time that the people in the carriages had to sit in there for. And just to give you an example of how really hot it was in there, just look at this. You know how hard bars of chocolate are? Just look at this. Carl Heidel, Anglia News, Northampton.
Well, joining us now is Shailesh Vara. He's one of our local MPs. Shailesh, what do you make of all this?
Well, I'm delighted that there's going to be an inquiry. I hope it's a very thorough one. I'm a little concerned about the level of compensation, though, because just throwing in a complimentary return ticket doesn't seem enough to me for the enormous emotional stress that a lot of people experienced during those hours. And let's not forget, there were pregnant women there were elderly people, as well as people from all walks of life, and they suffered enormously yesterday, so I think there ought to be some compensation for the stress they endured. I'm a little concerned also that there are rumours that there's only one ladder for people to get off the train. Now, if that is the case, then they certainly need to review that position. And, of course, I also hear rumours that first-class passengers were allowed to get off the train before the others. Now, if that is the case, then I'm very concerned. I want to ask some serious questions, because in a crisis situation, all people should be treated equally. And I would have thought in a first-class compartment there was a lot more room, a lot more comfort, and actually the economy class people should have been allowed off first rather than the first-class people.
Shailesh Vara, thank you very much. Well, this truly has been a nightmare for hundreds of travellers. Back to you.
Mike and your crew, thank you.
Right, some news in brief now. Lottery winner Michael Carroll is facing an antisocial behaviour order after driving through Downham Market in Norfolk, firing ball bearings from his car window. Carroll, seen here at an earlier hearing this week, appeared before magistrates in Kings Lynn yesterday to admit 3 charges of criminal damage. The court heard he'd carried out a series of drive-by shootings in Downham Market, breaking windows in shops and parked cars. The case was adjourned until Tuesday.
A ticket machine in Bury St Edmunds kept local residents awake last night when it started printing hundreds and hundreds of blank tickets shortly after midnight. When the machine in Churchgate Street ran out of paper, an alarm was set off that